Today's video is about the Phenomenology of Perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. I can say in advance that Ponty takes a more radical approach to the subject and does not, like Husserl, start from a constitutional system of the subject, which was explained in the last video. In his main work, Phenomenology of Perception, he defends a thesis that has come to be known as the primacy of perception. Primacy must be understood here as priority. Let us begin. Ponty says, it is true that the lamp has a backside and the cube has another area. But this formulation "it is true" does not correspond to what is given in my perception. This does not give me truths like geometry, but presences. Ponty means the backside of the book, if we go back to the example of the last few videos, is not a possibility or a necessity, but a presence. He goes on to say, if instead I consider the context of my perception, I become aware of another modality, which is neither the geometer's ideal and necessary being, nor the simple sensuous proof, the percepi, which we now have to examine. Ponty accuses Husserl of not paying attention to his own perception. Husserl has described the backsides as possibilities, whereas Ponty says that the backsides are present. The unseen side, so Ponty, is grasped by me as present, and I do not claim that the backside of the lamp exists in the sense in which I say the solution to the problem exists. The hidden side is present in its own way. It's in my vicinity. Therefore, I must not say that the unseen sides of objects are simply possible perceptions, nor that they are necessary inferences from some kind of analysis or geometric reasoning. What brings the invisible sides to the given with the visible sides of the object, this synthesis that leads from the given to what is not bodily given, is not a synthesis of the mind, which posits the whole object at will, but is rather like a practical synthesis. I can touch the lamp, not only on the side that is presented to me, but also on the other side. This shows that Ponty has a completely opposite opinion than Husserl. It's a present of the backside for Ponty. So, it is not an interplay of pretension and retention as Husserl thinks. This is Ponty's main thesis. In the end, we cannot explain perception, one has to start from perception. He accuses Husserl of trying to explain something that cannot be explained. Ponty exemplarily carries out this radical thinking on various objects. Probably the most famous example is how he describes the Muller-Lyer illusion. He says, the two lines of the Muller-Lyer illusion are neither equal nor unequal in length because the alternative is only compelling in the world of objectivity. It demands that two perceived stretches, as two real stretches, must be equal or unequal without having an eye for the fact that it is essential for the perceived to include ambiguities, fluctuations, influences of context. In the Muller-Lyer illusion, one of the lines is not equal to the other without being unlike. It is rather different. In other words, for perception, an isolated objective line and the same in a shape context are not the same. The stretch in these two functions can only be identified in an analytical perception that is not natural. By this, Ponty means that when someone says, these distances seem unequal to me, but actually, they are of the same length, this person gives a primacy to how we should deal with these lines. He would think that using a ruler to measure the distances is the access to the real thing. That would be the way to find out the truth, so seeing would be a deception. But that means that you give the ruler a power, namely the power to reveal the truth to you. So, measuring would be the privileged path to actuality as it really is. But now Ponty says, why don't we do it the other way around? And say the ruler is wrong because it comes to the conclusion that the lines are equal in length, although I don't see them as equal. Why should we give the ruler the power to disempower perception, but not the other way around? We have two ways of treating the illusion. I can see them and notice that they are not the same length. I can measure them and find that they are the same length. Ponty wants to take perception out of the bondage of other disciplines. Most people would think that the sciences have an actual access to the world. Here, however, the primacy of perception is evident. Ponty would say about the illusion. Two lines that are present in this constellation are of different length when we see them. So, Ponty suggests that we should take perception so seriously that we should not allow reality, that is a phenomenon, to be disempowered by a supposedly different reality. As a phenomenologist, you start from the phenomenon, and the phenomenon is that the two lines are different in length. Measuring the lines is not an argument that one has better access to reality. Now if you see this illusion and think that the straw just appears broken but is actually straight, and you can supposedly prove it is by grasping the straw, then you would be giving your sense of touch a better access to reality than your sense of sight. Ponty would say that there is no point in creating a hierarchy between the senses. The straw is broken when I see it and straight when I touch it. Here you can see that phenomenologists do not necessarily always have the same opinion, but only commit themselves to a common methodology. This position of Ponty now leads to the primacy of perception. The world is a phenomenon, we live in a phenomenal world. Ponty would like to describe this in detail, and he does this by taking a third path, just as he did with the Müller-Lyer illusion. In the history of the philosophy of perception, since Plato, the question has been asked again and again whether the fact that one sees a book, for example, is necessarily connected with the opinion that one believes that there is a book. Must someone who sees an object believe that there is an object? As you might expect, there are two opinions, one that you don't have to believe anything when you see an object and the other that you have to believe something when you see an object. The latter would mean that animals that are supposed to be able to perceive that see an object also have an opinion about this object. So, it would not mean, because I think, I can perceive, as the people at the linguistics turn claimed, but because I perceive, I can think. On this, Ponty says, it is impossible to cling to the certainty of perception, but give up the certainty of the thing perceived. If I see an ashtray in the full sense of the word seeing, then an ashtray must necessarily be there. I cannot suppress this assertion. Seeing is seeing something. Seeing red is really existing red seeing. If one reduces seeing to the mere presumption of seeing, then one imagines seeing as contemplating bottomless qualia. This means that if you reduce seeing to just imagining seeing, you are no longer dealing with seeing. It is essential to my seeing, not just to refer to something that is supposedly visible, but to something that is actually seen. So, it belongs to the quality of perception that the object of perception is a real being. The one who only thinks he can see no longer talks about seeing. To put it more simply, if a mathematician wants to rethink geometry and build everything from the ground and starts to doubt that squares really have four corners, then the mathematician stops talking about squares. By doubting what he cannot doubt, if he doesn't want to destroy the subject he is dealing with. It is the constitutum of a square to have four corners. The moment you doubt that what you see is real, you doubt what constitutes perception. Perception is the awareness of reality, so I cannot treat perception as if it were a dubious reality. In the English language, this problem of perception is discussed with the concept of believe. In the German language, however, there is a distinction between knowledge, Wissen, and certainty, Gewissheit, and between epistemological knowledge, Erkenntnis, and recognition that is undeniable, Kenntnis. There are different ways in which you can become aware that something is real. To illustrate with an example, you know that you own a book and have back pain. You have knowledge or epistemological knowledge about owning the book. You have certainty or recognition that is undeniable about your back pain. This means that one has knowledge or epistemological knowledge about things which one can doubt, and one has certainty and recognition that is undeniable about things about which one cannot doubt. Knowledge is true justified belief, and this justification can be false, therefore knowledge is a priori doubtful, for if it were not doubtful then it would not be knowledge but certainty. Now going back to the problem, do we have to believe that the book is there, what we see or not, or does the rabbit have to believe that a book is there when it sees a book? The language analytic philosophist would say that the rabbit will not see a book unless it speaks English or some other language. Phenomenologists, on the other hand, are of the opinion that if seeing is connected to a view at all, then of course rabbits, which are known to be able to perceive, also see a book. Ponty would say that this discussion is naive because it assumes you have to believe there is or isn't a book. I am certain, or I have recognition, that is undeniable, that there is a book. Regarding the Müller-Lyer illusion he would say, I have a certainty that the lines are not of equal length and a knowledge that they are of equal length. Knowledge is acquired differently than certainty, for example with theories, measurements etc. If knowledge and certainty were used synonymously, then my doctor would know as well as I do that I have back pain, but this cannot be the case since the doctor can be wrong. I can simulate, whereas I cannot be wrong about it since I have the awareness of back pain or not back pain. Being in the world whose reality is so undeniable is as certain for Ponty as the reality of back pain. The reality of the world cannot be doubted at all because the reality of the world is not the product of a propositional assertion, but because the reality of the world is the necessary property of all things that I perceive. I cannot disregard this property at all because then perception would no longer be perception, as so as one cannot disregard the fact that squares have four corners. We cannot get behind the perception if we want to describe what it means to be in the world because we are certain of the existence of the world in which we are. That was the final word on the subject of the phenomenology of object perception. In the next two videos I will deal with the topic of image perception and imagination before the great Heidegger being and time series starts.